Good day, everyone, and welcome to our video lesson for Unit 4, Chapter 2, Review of Related Literature. So, first and foremost, I would like to congratulate everyone that you have already submitted your Chapter 1. And before we proceed with the discussion on how to write the review of related literature, we will first review what we have already accomplished so far for our research paper. So we are already done with chapter 1, the introduction, and that includes our background of the study, statement of the problem, hypothesis, theoretical and conceptual framework, scope and the limitations, significance of the study, and definition of terms. So that's it for the introduction, and we will now proceed to the meatiest part of our research paper. So, for the review of related literature, this is actually chapter 2, and it immediately follows our definition of terms, but we will be starting with a fresh page. So, if you still have like half a page left blank after definition of terms, we'll be proceeding to a new page for the chapter 2, which symbolizes that chapter 1 is now finished, and the reader will immediately identify the start of a new chapter. Wow. So, the review of related literature is a compilation of studies related to a specific area of research. It evaluates, classifies, and summarizes all the relevant previous studies conducted on a specific topic. So, usually, when we write research, this is the lengthiest, meaning this is the longest part of our research because you will be identifying all the previous studies related to your study. Okay, so the review of related literature is designed to justify your research by exposing gaps of the previous studies. And how can we establish previous gaps, or how can we expose gaps in the previous studies? It's by discussing thoroughly and analyzing thoroughly what has been done in this specific topic. So that's why we are looking for studies that are directly related to our study, because that's how we will be able to identify the gaps. So, for example, if you found a study that has the same variables as your study, but it doesn't touch on a specific region, or it doesn't touch, or it doesn't include moderating variables that we will be including in your study, then that could be your gap. And how can we identify those gaps? By having all these studies and including them in the review of related literature. The second characteristic of the RRL is that it should be centralized, meaning all the elements or everything that you will be including in the RRL should have a central theme, or is a central topic. So you should not include topics that are not significant to your study. So when we say that the RRL should be centralized, you should analyze well the different studies that you are looking for in the review of related literature that you are reading, and you should analyze if this is related or if this is insignificant to our study. So it actually, having the review of related literature, it requires you to brainstorm, it requires you to analyze not just individually but as a group. Okay, so you need to really talk it out and really identify the variables, identify the research design. If the study is qualitative, how can we relate it to our present study, which is quantitative? So you need to really ask yourself those questions for you to be able to centralize your RRL to your topic. So if your topic is on financial literacy, you should be able to analyze each literature that you are reading for it to be as related as possible to your topic, as significant as possible. So that's why when I instruct you to look for literature, I tell you to look for literature that has as much as possible the same variables as your study so that it's as significant as possible, di ba? And look for literature that has a respondent or participant that is as close as possible to your participants because that's how you will establish the connection between the two of them. Okay. And lastly, review of related literature provides support and full comprehension of the developments in the field. So, for example, for ICT, they are um, trying to identify the effectiveness of comprehensive tutorials for senior citizen. So their literature or their RRL should provide support for the comprehensive tutorial and a full comprehension of what has been done in that specific topic. Ano na bala ang mga developments in terms of tutorials for senior citizens? May applications na bala, may video lessons na bala nga easily accessible in the internet, may na bala outreach na naobra which aims to provide support for the senior citizens in terms of how they use social media. So your RRL should provide what has been endeavored, what has been researched already in that specific field so that you will know already, ang amon na comprehensive tutorial, wala pa rin siya naobra sa iban. So this will be our contribution to that topic, to that field. Okay? Or there was a researcher in, for example, Malaysia, which or who developed an application for senior citizens to use for to guide them in using social media. So maybe you can also apply that application in your research, diba? So it provides support on how you will do your research. It provides additional research materials for you. Okay, and the review of related literature will actually guide you on how you can contribute more to that field and how you can effectively um, go through with your research, especially for experimental researches. Okay, so those are the characteristics of what an RRL should be. Now let's go to the purpose of a literature review. So the literature review is often, it frightens researchers because it's actually very time consuming since you will need to really read and read and read a lot of literature that is related to your topic. And of course, there is a need for you to include researches that are recent, okay, and which had significant impact um, to their respondents, to their community, and it's it's very tedious. Okay, damo ni siya obrahon because you are not just citing the researchers, you are analyzing the researchers, what they did wrong, what they did correctly, what was the significance of their study, and how you can use that study or how can that study guide you in your research as well. So it's not just about reading and then citing what you have read. It's about analyzing what you read and connecting them to your research. So this part of the research study of your research will actually test your teamwork, your cooperation, your participation, and it will test friendships. And after this, you will come out strong, and you will come out as better researchers, which I will be so proud of in the future. And I'm looking forward for you to tell me when you go to college that um, when we were studying research in senior high school, we had to go through this so that it will be easier for us in college. So hopefully, literature review will test friendships, will test your resilience as students, and it will show who you are as writers and as researchers. So, the purpose of the literature review, aside from the emotional and the affective part of the research, it's number one, to discover the connection of your research to the existing body of knowledge and to real life situations. So, of course, you will include researches that has already been published, and for sure, of course, they will not be able to publish if they haven't conducted or they haven't finished their researches, diba? So, meaning these researchers have already identified how you can use your theories, your conceptual framework, how you can apply them in real life situations. So, meaning you will be able to analyze also how your research will connect to what has been researched and to the real life situation in your community. Okay. Number two, purpose of the literature review. So we sometimes call this literature review or the review of related literature. So we can just interchange that. But in our paper, the chapter two is titled Review of Related Literature. Okay, so that you will not be confused with that. To the second purpose of a literature review is to identify more theories or concepts as the foundation of your research study and to learn from them. So, of course, just like what you did in chapter one, um, previous researchers have identified theories and concepts as foundation of their research as well. So, that's why when I asked you to do a background research on your topic, I wanted you to really look for what their design was, what their variables were, and what theory did they use. And that's why I wanted you to also save those literature that you have found in Mendeley, because as we progress in our research, we will be coming back to those literature that you have found. So for chapter 2, those who have used Mendeley for their research so far, you will be using that, and the Mendeley will be really useful for you in chapter 2. So, number 3 purpose is to determine the relationship of your research with previous studies to prevent duplication and to acknowledge other researchers. So, of course, um, duplication of researches, it's inevitable because there are a lot of researchers out there, and what that's why it's very important for us to establish the gap in terms of your respondents, gap in terms of your locality, gap in terms of your research material, gap in terms of your technique, in terms of your strategy, in terms of your moderating variable. So it's very important to identify those gaps so that it's not entirely a duplicate of other researchers, or of other researches. So, if ever there are researches that we have the same variables with, so for example, same gid ang main variables in the title, we can acknowledge them. Okay? And of course, we can change also our research so that um, it's not an entire duplication of the previous research. So for example, nakita nyo ba, in a previous research, same gid ang moderating variables. May age gid sila, may strand gid sila, kag may general weighted average. Anong mahimo tada para hindi siya mag-duplicate? Ano ang gap? Ang gap naman aton nga respondents, our locality. So that's why it's very important nga na-establish ta ang aton gap in chapter 1. Okay? And lastly, of course, we write the literature review to acquaint ourselves with the technical terminologies relevant to our study. So just like sa ICT, I wasn't familiar with the technicalities that you use, especially if it's very technical and it's too anchored on CSS. Okay, so that's how you will be identifying your variables as well, or your terminologies, by studying the available literature. So just like ABM, I we are not familiar with, of course, as English majors like myself, I am not familiar with accounting terminologies, diba? Your jargons, your profit, your revenue. So we learn those terminologies by, of course, reading our previous literature. So that's the purpose of literature review. The first four. We have three more purposes of literature review. So number five, purpose of literature review is to acquire knowledge on the accuracy and the significance of your research questions. So, um, previous studies may also be your reference in terms of asking yourselves, is my research question measurable? Is my research question feasible? Kung nakaya gani nila kwaon or gather ang data nga needed to answer that question, then kaya mo man, di ba? So the previous study would be your reference in terms of how you will gather your data, how you will answer your research questions. Okay? Next, to determine possible gaps, conflicts, and open questions left from other researchers, which might help you in formulating and justifying your research ideas. So, when we talk about literature review, it's not just about the positive results of the research. It's also the challenges. We include also the challenges encountered by the researchers, the negative side of the research. So we also include that in the discussion in the literature review, because we may encounter those challenges as well. Okay, and we already know by the from the experience of other researchers, we already know how to provide solution for those challenges, or how to overcome those challenges, and maybe we can find a solution for those problems in our research, diba? And that's how you will eventually contribute to that specific body of knowledge. And lastly, the purpose of literature review is to clarify misconceptions on previous research and help refocus, polish, and contribute to the development of the body of knowledge. So, of course, our world is dynamic. Just like research, it's very dynamic. So, kung sa una, wala pa napamatud-an ang pagka-effective sang tawa-tawa for against dengue, di ba? Susubong, may misconception nga bad ang tawa-tawa for us. But as research went on, sang nagdamo ng research, na-clarify ang misconception and napamatud-an ang pagka-effective sang amo ng klase ng plant to fight dengue. So that's the purpose of research. to clarify misconceptions. And you will, of course, you will organize those thoughts, those ideas in your literature review if there are misconceptions in your research. Okay? So for example, may misconception nga ay ang mga senior high school subong damo na gid sila reliant na sila katama sa AI. So that's a misconception. And that misconception, you can clarify that in the literature review. And eventually, you will clarify that in your discussion of the results and findings. So, very important ang literature review in our research. We have 7 purposes. Next, so why is the RRL important in the study? So we've already identified 7 purposes, di ba? But also, the RRL is very important because it plays a significant impact on the discussion of the results and findings. And we actually go back to the chapter 2 when we write chapter 4. Okay? We really we really cite the page in page amoni ginambal sang researcher amoni same sa amon findings. So chapter 2 and chapter 4 are highly connected with each other. So whatever we find in the RRL, we cite that in the results and findings or the discussion of the results and findings. So the RRL provides context as a foundation to develop your ideas. So for example, based sa Malaysia, may nag-research sa low ang financial literacy sa mga senior high school. So they improve their financial literacy education in the school. So that's the context already of your research. Okay. Also, the RRL compares your findings from, you will be able to compare your findings from other previous studies when you establish that in the RRL. So, i-compare mo ang level of financial literacy nga na kuha nila sa Malaysia kag nakuha naton diri sa aton sa imong nga study, i-compare mo na sila nga duwa and you will be able to understand ano ang connection sa ilang nga duwa. Is it pareho or is it mas taas diyan sa aton? So, what does that imply? Nga mas nami ang aton financial literacy education? Or kung mas taas ang ilang financial literacy sa ila to nga respondents, mas nubuat ang financial literacy, ano ang implication sina? Pwede ayhan balata maka-benchmark from their financial literacy education to improve our own, 'di ba? So that's how you connect your findings to the RRL, to the findings of other researchers. Next, the RRL states what contribution your study has made in the field. So, our goal in the research is, diba, to fill the gap in research. And kung may na-identify ka dito nga gap sa RRL that you have filled in the discussion, you will have to cite that one. You will have to mention that one. So, of course, by identifying nga may gap ikaw nga na-fillinan, meaning you will be able to say nga, I have contributed significantly in that field. Okay? So there are 3 common errors that are usually made when including literature reviews in the discussion of the study. So number 1, of course, including irrelevant studies. So as much as possible, the same main variables, the same research design, and lapit-lapit dapat na respondents. So if you are afraid that it will be a duplication, then we can still edit or we can still revise what you have already decided on your research because that's the purpose of literature review, diba? So remember, our research, our paper is a work in progress, and whatever you have discovered in the RRL is a foundation of the strength, okay? Kung ano kanami ang inyong research. Also, another error made in the RRL is not citing the original author. So kana mo sa aton gapamakot nga miss gin-cite niya ni bala ang si ano ang author nga gin-cite ninyo, gin-cite niya man ang ginambas ng another author. So ang himuon naton is we will need to find the original author and we need to cite the original author themselves. So kinahanglan point out na siya diin siya gin-cite. Ano ang gin-cite nga paper? Ano ang gin-cite nga journal article? Ang mo to sang i-cite ta ang original. Okay? And of course, citing previous research based only on the abstract and without reading the entire research. So when we include researches in our RL, ang importante is of course the results and discussion. Naging successful ba lang ila research? Ano ang findings nila? What are the implications of their findings? Anong gin-recommend sang researcher? And um, ano naging challenges sa researcher? Ang nga mga questions, we will not be able to answer those by just reading the abstract or the abstract of the research. So we really need to analyze the different parts, especially the chapter 4. Okay, so remember again, when citing previous research, do not just read the abstract, read until chapter 4 and include the findings, include the implications, include the recommendations, and include the challenges that the researchers have encountered. So, um, of course, if that's the case, malawig-lawig, no, ang aton discussions. So, what we need to do is to summarize those ideas in one or two paragraphs only. So, when we write the RRL, we limit the discussion per research into two, one, two, or ang pinakalawig na three paragraphs. That's it. Okay? Sige. Next, let's have the structure of literature review. So this is how you're going to structure your review of related literature. The main goal for doing this is to make the reader understand easily the different studies and how they are relevant to your study. So we have the introduction, of course. It somehow presents the fundamental idea of the particular study of the literature review. The main body, of course, consisting of the organized discussion of the sources. This is where you summarize and synthesize your literature review and reflect how they are related to your study. So, of course, the main body is the longest part of the literature review. And for the conclusion and recommendation emphasize what you have learned from reviewing the literature and where your study leads to. So, of course, we still use the IBC format where the introduction we will have one or two paragraphs for the main body as long as you can. Just remember that, of course, you have to um, you have to include researches that are recent, okay, recency in our research. So 2010, sige, 2010 ba to nun ko? 2010. And conclusions and recommendations, of course, one or two paragraphs as well. So that's it. So later I will be giving you the contents mismo. Anong i-include natin sa IBC. Alright? So let's move on to the different types of literature review. So there are different types of literature review. This is according to Newman 2011. Following the type of literature review depends on how you organize and present your review of related studies. So number one, we have context review from the name itself. Context review is primarily focused on the content or contextual aspect of research. So Usually, it is a type of review in which the researcher relates his or her study to a larger body of knowledge. It presents the current research by merging it into a wider framework and determine its contribution and impact to the specific field of study. So, nag-focus lang kita sa isa ka topic for the context review, which is, it would be, kumbaga, hindi siya muna kaid-id, no? Kaysa sa need naton in a literature review because considering your researches, you have your correlational, you have your experimental, and you have your um, descriptive, but you have two main variables, more than one variable. So it's difficult to have a context review wherein we will just focus in one subject area or topic, because how can you relate the variables if you will just focus on one topic, diba? So context review will be beneficial to researchers who will who use qualitative, let's say, okay, or who has one variable only. Okay? So that's it. So usually wala kita naga context review if we have more than one variables. Next type of literature review is the historical review. It is a specialized type of literature review in which the researcher organizes the related research according to the period of time it was conducted. Historical literature review focuses on probing research in a specified field throughout a chronological order, which usually starts from the oldest period of time going to the most recent studies. The goal of this type of research is to gain knowledge on the advancement of technology and to identify developments on certain areas which progress through time. It can be integrated with a theoretical or methodological review to illustrate how a concept, theory, or research method developed through time. So we use the historical review, or we write the historical review if our topic requires it. Kumbaga, especially if we are researching on an invention, okay? For example, for my students in I remember we used a historical review when my STEM students innovate had an innovation on a water filter. So their review related literature focused on a historical review in which they identified what type of water filter has been used by people long ago and what happened to its evolution until it became what it is now. Now we have, of course, high end water filter. And that's how they were able to relate their study to nga their study is innovative katama because as the water filter evolved, kumbaga, nakita nila ang pag-evolve sa water filter and ang ila nga invention ang pinaka-innovative sa ila tanan. Okay? So that's how we will use historical review. So if we look at your researches, no, it doesn't require historical review since we are not creating, we are not, kumbaga, we are not creating a new product, no? Hi, it's a historical review. It's taman ka id-id. And ma-apply lang ta sa historical review if need siya sa aton nga research, which is hindi man naton kinahanglan sa inyo nga mga researches. Next, integrative review is a common type of literature review in which the researcher introduces and summarizes the recent knowledge of the study. It emphasizes the agreements and disagreements of knowledge among various previous research. It also considers reviews, critics, and synthesizes representative literature in an integrated way in order to generate new structure and viewpoint on the topic. This is the most common form of literature review in the social sciences. So this review is usually merged with a context review. Okay, so we can use different types of reviews in our research. Okay, but for us to be able to um, make it simpler, okay, to make the RRL easier to write for us, we will just choose what type. No, we'll just use what type of research we will type of literature review we will use. So as I look at it, this the integrative review is actually the easiest one. Okay, and looking at our researches, this is the most applicable one for us because, of course, we will identify a lot of reviews, we will identify a lot of researches coming from different locations, localities. And so we will integrate all those things or all those ideas into a new structure. And this will help us in our conceptual framework. Diba? So, since your researches, it has, it can be identified as under social sciences. So we can really use the integrative review. Okay. Anyway, when we use a kind of review, we don't necessarily introduce or mention in our paper that, oh, this paper uses the integrative review. Okay. So the readers will just can just identify it, and it's just a way for us to organize our thoughts in in a way that it's easy for the readers to read. Okay, so we will just use it as our guiding principle in writing our RRL. Let's have the fourth type of literature review, methodological review. It's a specialized type of review in which the researcher gathers, compares, and contrasts other studies to the current research. It basically summarizes and evaluates the strengths and gaps in methodological aspects of various studies and illustrates the effects of different methodologies, research design, samples, process to different outcomes. This approach also emphasizes ethical issues when necessary, which you should consider and be conscious of as you go through your current research. So, the methodological review, usually it's used in experimental researches, wherein mga scientific gid siya bala, no? Na for example, nagbuat sila bulong na ano ang gingamit sang other researches, anong gingamit nila nga technique, anong gingamit nila nga mga ingredients, no? Anong gingamit nila pang combine. And so gina-compare and contrast nila, of course, anong effect na siya sa ilang nga participants or sa ilang nga subjects. So it's more on scientific researches. So for our fifth type of literature review, self-study review, is a literature review in which the researcher demonstrates his or her understanding of a specific body of knowledge. It contains um, existing proof associated to a clearly stated research questions and uses standardized methods to determine and evaluate relevant research. However, it can also produce problems of prejudice, especially when it is used to summarize claims or statements linking his or her findings to a system of knowledge. So typically, it is a practice in the educational program or course requirement. So, self-study review naman, it's based on your own experience. So um, it requires for the researcher to have a specific experience, to have a, kumbaga, you have to have the experience to be able to write a self-study review because, of course, you cannot write what you do not have, what you haven't experienced, what you do not know. Okay, so it requires um, for someone to be really highly intelligent, no, to have a self-study review. So you cannot remember when we are doing research, we look at facts. We anchor our ideas on facts and not on opinions. So when we write self-study review, the challenge is how to write this review without having the prejudice, okay, without having biases. So it needs or it requires a researcher or a writer who is, you know, very intelligent and has experienced a lot and very objective. So it will be very difficult even for me as a master's degree, as a postgraduate degree student. So it's very difficult. However, if we reach that expertise in the future, maybe we can try to write a self-study review. And the last one is theoretical review. It's a literature review in which the researcher introduces several theories or concepts that are focused on a specific topic. It is particular on the theories and concepts being highlighted, um, on other researches and compares them to the current study basing on its framework, hypothesis, consistency, and justification. The theoretical literature review aids in establishing the theories already existed, the relationships of theories among various studies, the degree of its investigation, and the development of new hypotheses. So, for this naman, if our study is theory driven, then we can really write the theoretical review. However, our studies are hypothesis driven, so maybe we can focus on using an integrative review. So, how pero sige lang, the type of literature review, it's not that important, okay, as compared to an organizing principle. So later, I will give you some examples of um, organizing principles for our research. But of course, for now, we will decide on what type of literature review we will use, and that's integrative. So we can also use contextual review, no, but mas nami ang integrative because you will be able to really explore your variables when it comes to integrative, when we use integrative review. All right, so let's move on to the different types of sources for a literature review. Of course, I've already discussed this with you, but I just want to review this one, no, because when I look at your citations, sometimes there are no authors, sometimes um, it's not taken from a journal article. Okay, so we need to be very strict, especially that it's a literature review na. Okay, now researchers must be acquainted with the three basic types of sources, which are the general references, primary, and secondary sources. General references are sources in which a researcher refers to track down other sources. Primary sources are publications in which a researcher accounts the findings of his or her investigations, and the most primary sources are found in journal articles. For the secondary sources naman, these are publications in which a researcher considers the work of others. So that's why we use ang primary sources, which are journal articles. Okay. Where can you find the review of related literature? So, as a researcher, you can find information about the research studies in numerous formats such as books, scholarly journal articles, dissertations, government documents, policy reports, and periodicals. Most researchers are also presenting their findings during meetings, congress, and conventions of professional societies and organizations. You can find related literature in, of course, books. Next, scholarly journals, which are our top priority when we are looking for literature. Okay, so you will need to have scholarly journals as your primary sources. Of course, dissertations, which are final requirements for the degree of Doctor of Philosophy. Okay, we have government documents. Most government agencies around the world support research undertakings and publish the findings of the study. So you can find that in your municipal libraries. You can find that in memos nga ginapagawa sa aton nga government. Laws, of course, bills, republic acts, no? Number five, policy reports and presented papers, of course. And last one are periodicals, which are findings of the study which can be seen in newspapers and popular magazines, on television or radio broadcasts, and internet news summaries. However, when using periodicals, kung makita nyo na gani ang ila research sa periodical, makitaon nyo Japon ang original. Ha? So, para dito kita sa kung ano gid ang kung ano gid ang original nga reference. Okay? Sige. Now, let's go to organizing principles of the RRL. So we have three organizing principles: thematic, chronological, or methodological. Okay, those types man siya, no? Amo ni siya ang sundo naton no organizing principle, how we organize our RRL. So we have three, mapili lang kita di isa. So let's start with thematic. A thematic literature review is a type of literature review that focuses on identifying and analyzing recurring themes within a specific body of research. Unlike a chronological review that summarizes studies in order of publication, a thematic review groups research based on shared concepts, ideas, or perspectives. So instead of simply summarizing each study, the review synthesizes findings under identified themes, offering a deeper understanding of the topic. Now, the thematic organizing principle has benefits. So, number one is deeper understanding of the topic. So, when we are grouping research by themes, you gain a more profound understanding of the complexities and nuances surrounding a topic. So, this is very effective for researches that have um, more than one variables. So just like your research, no, when you have more than one variables, then you can really have a thematic organizing principle in your RRL, and you start, of course, with your first variable. So you can list all the researches about your first variable, then followed by the second variable, and then you can follow that with the interconnection between the two of them. Okay, so that's how you do thematic organizing principle. So, of course, for the thematic organizing principle, you can also identify gaps. You can uncover areas where research is limited or lacking. So it prompts you to have further investigation. And also, you can compare and contrast research across themes. You can identify new perspectives and develop a more comprehensive picture of the research landscape. So that's for the thematic organizing principle. We have here an example. For example, we have the title level of utilization of tepid online educational resources. So you can have your themes here: awareness and accessibility, since utilization siya, no? Integration and skills, impact and outcomes. So you can have that one. So you can, or you can also have your um, moderating variables as your themes. Okay, so that's it for the thematic organizing principle. And I would suggest for you to use this one because you will be able to discuss thoroughly each theme for your research. So let's have the second one, chronological literature review. Unlike unlike the thematic counterpart, it focuses on presenting research findings in the order they were published. So just like our chronological type of literature review. So its benefits, of course, you will include the historical context of the topic, and then you can identify trends, what happened in its evolution. And chronological reviews highlight seminal and influential studies that shape the current understanding of the topic and can also influence your research. Next example we have here early studies. You can organize your RRL just like this: early studies, development phase, and recent research. So you can, if you can notice, this is very important, or this is very effective for capstone projects, diba? Or innovation, invention, yeah. And lastly, we have methodological literature review. Okay, so for the methodological, no, this, and lastly, for the methodological review, so just like the literature review earlier, discussed earlier, so it compares and contrasts the different parts of the research. So again, for the last organizing principle, methodological review. So again, for the last organizing principle, which is methodological review, just like what was discussed earlier, you compare and contrast the methods used in the different research, which is it's not necessary for our research right now, especially for social studies, no, because palariyo lang man ang aton nga methods. So usually ang aton nga gaps in the research are your locality, your respondents, your variables. So this is basically used in scientific researches. So I would suggest, if we are going to select from the three, what what will be most effective for your researches will be the thematic organizing principles. All right, so we are done with RRL organizing principles. Let's go to the structure of a literature review, specifically the contents of the RRL. So this is the most exciting part, no? So for the introduction, of course, you have your introductory paragraph. This introduces the literature review and should include the organizing principle used to write the review and its contents. So you can just say, this part of the research is the reviews the related literature to the topic or to the main variable. Okay, and you can say this review of related literature is organized thematically or uses the thematic organizing principle with the themes followed by your theme. All right. So later I will give you examples for that. For the body, of course, you will have organized discussion of the resources. So um, per research that you will cite, you can have one minimum of one paragraph and a maximum of three paragraphs. No? Para hindi lang tamang gid kalawig ang aton nga RL nga about na lang na siya sa isa ka research. Okay? Next, this is the lengthiest part of the RL or even the manuscript and should follow an organizing principle. Okay, and I suggest you use the thematic organizing principle. So this part of the RL should have, of course, proper citation and referencing. For the conclusion, it includes the synthesis of the key findings and the recommendations for what happens next in the study. If there are two or more variables, this part must include discussion on how variables intersect and relate. So let's have examples for the introductory paragraph. For example, financial stress and academic performance of firstborn senior high school students. For the introductory paragraph, the study delves into the existing body of research to explore the relationship between financial stress and the academic performance of firstborn senior high school students in the Philippines. The literature review is organized thematically, focusing on key areas where financial strain has been shown to impact academic achievement. These areas will encompass the financial stress and academic performance of firstborn children, influence of financial stress on student focus, motivation, and access to educational resources. Okay, so that's the introductory paragraph. For the body, you can have your themes here. For example, financial stress of firstborn children, academic performance of firstborn children, financial stress on student focus, financial stress on student motivation, and financial stress on access to educational resources. Okay, so with that, per theme, you will include as many researches as you can. Okay. And the last one, financial stress and academic performance of firstborn senior high school students, conclusion part. This include your key points for each theme. So, bisan one sentence per theme lang. Then synthesize the interconnectedness of the variables, and it should include implications to the present study. All right? Sige. So, I will be sending an example of the RRL, and you will be writing your review of related literature after you watch this video lesson, which is on Friday. So Thursday you will watch this video lesson. Friday you will need to write the introductory paragraph, and I will be requiring you to write or to submit an outline of your theme, okay, on Monday. That's exam already. Um, sige, on Wednesday. Okay, that's March 27. All right, and then the deadline of the RRL will be 1 April 8. All right, April 8. That's Monday. So see you everyone, and good luck on your review of related literature.